Thank you, Bill, for that very kind introduction. It is normal when one gives an address to begin by saying thank you. Let me also begin by saying thank you for your patience. It is very embarrassing to discover that you are capable of going to universities and earning a PhD, but not capable of reading a simple schedule. So I apologize for being slightly tardy. I want to say it is a pleasure and an honor to be here tonight to give the Mary Belknap lecture. The Foreign Policy Association has done wonderful work over the years in improving what Americans know about foreign policy, improving the tenor of the debate. I, as a university professor, am a particular fan of the Great Decision series, and I think we all owe a debt of gratitude to Mary for all the work she's done for the association over the years. Always speaking to the mic. I think I also want to thank Noel Lateef for inviting me to speak here tonight, and to all of you for coming out this evening. I'm glad to see that there are so many early tax filers who'd have to stick around struggling with their either accountant over the phone or their wonderful soft tax software. Tonight I would like to talk to you a bit about America Unbound, the recent book that Ivo Daalder and I wrote. I cannot do that without first acknowledging my deep debt of gratitude to Ivo. We've known each other for quite a long time. He is a wonderful person, a wonderful scholar, and a more punctual and elegant speaker than I am. Let me sort of begin by talking about why we wrote the book. I think it's important. Basically, we wanted to be able to explain to Americans and to people outside the United States what is the worldview that's driving American foreign policy today. That was sort of our goal in writing the book, and our argument is straightforward, and that is you cannot understand American foreign policy today, international affairs today, without understanding that George W. Bush, a man once caricatured as an amiable dunce ambling through history, as one book title put it, has unleashed a revolution in American foreign policy. That revolution is not one, I should emphasize, in the ends of American foreign policy. That is what American foreign policy seeks to accomplish. Bush's aspirations for America abroad, peace, security, prosperity, are all indistinguishable from those of Presidents Truman or Kennedy or Clinton. Rather, what the Bush Revolution is about is a revolution of the means in American foreign policy. It's a revolution in how America engages in the world. In America Unbound, what we argue is that this revolution is not an accident. It does not reflect political expediency. It wasn't something ginned up after September 11th. Rather, it reflects a long-standing set of principles and reflects a consistent and coherent worldview. Indeed, George Bush came to the White House with a consistent and very deeply felt worldview. Now, Bush's critics, and even many of his supporters, missed it at the time because they were too focused on how little they think he knew about the world beyond America's borders, rather than on how intensely he believed. They argue, wrongly in my view, that because he does not fit their stereotype of what a leader should be like, that he must be being led by his advisors rather than leading them. And our argument in America Unbound is that both arguments are wrong. Now, I mentioned that Bush has unleashed a revolution. What precisely is this revolution about? At its broadest level, it embraces one of the fundamental pillars of Wilsonianism, the foreign policy vision that Woodrow Wilson laid out nearly a century ago, even as it rejects another. When Wilson first called for a League of Nations after World War I, he rejected the idea that the United States would harm its interests or its values by being continually engaged in the world. He rejected a philosophy that had been sort of a cardinal tenet in American foreign policy throughout the 19th century and was best expressed by then Secretary of State John Quincy Adams, that America does not go abroad in search of monsters to destroy. Wilson's argument was that America had to go abroad in search of monsters to destroy, had to be engaged in the world, both because of its interests and because of its values. For Wilson, the danger lay in not acting, and the same with Bush. Where Bush departs from Wilson is on the second pillar of Wilsonianism and much of recent practice in American foreign policy, and that's on the value of international law and international institutions. For Woodrow Wilson and for his intellectual descendants, these international institutions and international law were essential for creating a more just and secure world. They were part of what American foreign policy had to be about. For Woodrow Wilson, it was the League of Nations. For Harry Truman and others, it was the United Nations, the Bretton Woods system, and a number of other international institutions. For George Bush, these institutions are either irrelevant or an impediment to achieving American aims abroad. Let me sort of summarize the Bush worldview fairly quickly. He and his advisors believed that in a dangerous world, and they would emphasize it is a world full of danger, the best, if not the only, way to ensure America's security is to shed the constraints imposed by others. They believe that power, especially military power, is the coin of the realm in international affairs. Because America is a uniquely just great power and is seen by others as being such, they would argue, it can wield its enormous military might unsentimentally. If we lead, others will follow, as people in the White House are fond of saying. Formal arrangements, be they alliances or other multilateral institutions, inevitably impede Washington's ability to get what the United States needs, its ability to make the most of its unrivaled power. In essence, by working to create international institutions, what Gulliver is doing is helping the Lilliputians tie him down. Only an America unbound can maximize the security of the American people. This worldview has an obvious consequence for the conduct of American foreign policy, and that is the President has a strong preference for being able to act unilaterally. Now, be very careful here because the debate can be easily caricatured. This is not to say that the President flatly opposes working with others. If anyone would make that argument, it's easily falsified. Okay? Rather, the President has his own preferred form of how he will work with others. And that is, and this sort of working with others is to be indulged in when unilateral is either impractical or politically unwise. And that is, it's a form of working with others that emphasizes coalitions of the willing. That is, countries willing to take direction from Washington, D.C. Now, clearly the President has on occasion turned to international institutions. Like in September of 2002, when the President went not too far away from here to the United Nations General Assembly and gave a speech talking about the need to return weapons inspectors to Iraq. Or more recently, the administration has talked about giving the United Nations a greater role in Iraq in managing the transition. The President has done this, though, not out of a sense of obligation to these institutions and a sense of acknowledgments they have a legitimate claim, but because they help him solve an immediate political problem. What Bob Kagan, sometime columnist for the Washington Post, has called instrumental multilateralism. Now, as we sort of think about this revolution, it's important to answer the question, why? Why did it occur? Why now? Why this type of revolution? And Ivo and I would offer up three basic reasons. One is that it actually touches on strains deep in the American political tradition. Okay, if you go back to the 19th century, you discover that many Americans, going back to the Republic, beginning of the Republic, in fact, had a strong distaste for the idea of tying America's fortunes to the fortunes of others. If you think of the Washington's farewell address, one of its arguments was not to become entangled with Europe. That began sort of as a practical calculation, not as it was a very small country on the edges of the known universe, but even at the time, as the known world, not universe, even at the time America emerged as a great power at the beginning of the 20th century, there was a decided distaste for becoming entangled with others. We went to war in World War I, which broke with American tradition. We were not an allied power, but we were an associated power in deference to that sensibility. Indeed, the Treaty of Versailles went down to defeat the United States Senate, not because of the isolationists, who were very small in number, though very vocal, but because of a very large block of internationalists led by Senator Henry Cabot Lodge of Massachusetts, who were happy to accept Wilson's notion we need to be engaged in the world. They did not want to commit America necessarily any course of action with anyone else. They preferred what is called the policy of the free hand. Second reason is that there have been changes in world power. The desirability, the desire to pursue a policy of the free hand persisted after World War II. You can go back and find many people in the debates in the late 40s, early 50s who argued the United States simply go out and do what it needed to do, regardless of how that might affect others. And at the end of the day, there was always a reason not to follow that course of action. That reason was a nuclear-armed Soviet Union. A policy that sounded appealing where the United States had no local challenger or commensurate power, all of a sudden looked reckless in a world in which such calculations could lead to nuclear war. Okay, and the fact is, with the passage of the Soviet Union in 1991, what had once looked like a course of action that was reckless now seems doable. Third is that for all the promise of international institutions, they have been a big disappointment for many people. Now, partly this had to do with Cold War rivalries, but partly it also had to do with the failure of Wilsonians over the past half-century to come to grips with the failings of the very international institutions they have so heartily endorsed. By sort of ignoring the organizational pathologies in many international institutions, they effectively ceded the debate to the critics, the people who didn't like international institutions, who gleefully pointed to the, at times, yawning gap between what these institutions were created to do and what they were capable of doing. That helped to undermine public confidence in these institutions and made it all the easier for President Bush to argue that we can circumvent them. Now, how well has the Bush Revolution fared? Even when I completed America Unbound in the aftermath of, we completed it in the aftermath of President Bush's triumphant landing on the USS Abraham Lincoln. You may recall the banner saying, mission accomplished. At the time, we argued that the revolution would not turn out so well. And I would argue that subsequent events have borne out our prediction, though I must confess things have gotten rockier even faster than either one of us had anticipated. And the reasons have to do with both style and substance. Okay, let me talk first about style. The president, many people in the room may recall, during the presidential debate said, if we are an arrogant nation, they'll resent us. If we're a humble nation but strong, they will welcome us. And I would submit that it's hard to reconcile the way the administration has conducted its diplomacy since coming to office with this very wise injunction. Whether it was President Bush refusing to place congratulatory phone calls to other heads of state that he was disappointed in, or Condoleezza Rice presumptuously calling the Kyoto Protocol dead, or Donald Rumsfeld equating Gerhard Schroeder's Germany with Fidel Castro's Cuba. On the diplomatic front, the administration has been all sharp elbows. Now, one consequence of this is that there's been a rise of anger toward the United States outside its borders. I won't bore you with all the poll results compiled by the Pew Center for People and Press, though they aren't terribly encouraging. But when you sort of read through the poll numbers, and they're uniformly depressing, it's hard not to come to the conclusion that in many parts of the world, the United States is seen as the SUV of nations, as the columnist Mary McGrory has put it, quote, hogging the road and guzzling the gas and occasionally running over something like another nation on its way to the Middle East filling station. Now, supporters of the president would say, well, so we're not popular in France, or we're not popular in Jordan, or we're not popular in Turkey, so what? What's the big deal? And the reason it's a problem is that this anger and resentment is not limited to simply the person in the street. It clearly extends to governments, even governments of our closest allies. Many of them now see their role not as being America's partner, but rather as being a brake on the improvident exercise of its power. Now, the casualty of all of this has been America's ability to lead. We've now reached the point where the White House has resorted to touting Micronesia and Palau as members of the coalition in Iraq because so many of our major allies have refused to participate. And I think that is something that should give us cause, a reason to pause. How well has the revolution fared, though, on a substantive level? So I think it's important to understand that even though there are problems with the style in which the President has conducted his administration, his problems aren't simply stylistic. There are substantive issues here. I mean, certainly it would be better for all concerned if the President showed what the Declaration of Independence called, quote, a decent respect for the opinions of mankind. But the deeper problem is that the fundamental premise of the Bush Revolution, the notion that an unbound America is a more secure America, is mistaken. Now, for all the talk of I think the President has spoken. Wow, that's a new experience. A very new experience. Okay, maybe that's a warning. For all the talk of the United States being a hyperpower, the world at the start of the 21st century is beyond the ability of any one country to control. The fact that we're talking about this as a moment of American primacy should not lead us to fall into the fallacy of thinking it's a moment of American omnipotence. As we look at it, sort of the challenges